What is up, folks? This is the Repertoire Podcast. I know it's been a while, and you might notice that there's another person sitting across the mic from me. We have Ray Delucci with us from the Line Cook Thoughts podcast and platform and all of the great things that he's done there. I know that we have done an episode or three maybe in the history of this show. We've done some kind of trade-off episodes. I've been on Ray's show. Ray's come on my show, specifically in the kind of domain that we're going to cover today, which is industry news, things that are happening in the kind of chef, restaurant, food space. I will turn it over to Ray to give us an update on what he's kind of been up to, but I wanted to use this episode almost as a intro to Ray because I think you're going to be seeing him a lot more, specifically in these types of episodes. I'm working on a series of long form podcasts that are going to go not so much on the interview route, but across like some really interesting history aspects of the industry that I'm very, very excited to bring to you folks. But in wanting to keep up to date on the things that I'm keeping tabs with and the things that Ray's just naturally reading himself, I know that Ray's going to kind of tackle a lot of the industry news stuff. And so instead of just kind of like making that transition in a haphazard way, I think we're going to do almost like what you folks might know of us as doing, which is jamming on industry news in this episode. And then if you see Ray pop in your feed, you kind of can get a little bit of a taste on what's to come. So Ray, thanks for being on again. Thanks for just putting your hand up and saying that you want to take this forward. Can you kind of give the listener an update on what you've been up to since we last spoke?
Yeah. So I guess real quick, did Line Cook Thoughts for about 5 years, took a break, was a little bit burnt out on food media. Have done a lot of writing behind the scenes, freelance writing for just some different restaurant websites. And then, I think a little bit ago, I just approached Justin, like, want to keep covering the food industry, obviously, but I wanted to have a broader impact. I think it's very important. I think there's a gap in both for restaurant people and people in the food industry in general of like food business and what's going on outside of restaurants. I think a lot of consumer trends you see in restaurants later on. And like, I think that type of stuff is very important. So the goal has kind of been building back up to a spot where I'm covering the industry with some restaurants thrown in, but also broader industry trends across the food industry, whether it's in kitchens, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in media, whether it's in, CPG brands, like all of that stuff. So that's kind of the quick version of it. But yeah, that's how we got here today. So
Can you brag a little bit though? Because I know that you have worked the line. I think that's what's prompted Line Cook Thoughts initially to get up and off the ground. And then from what I noticed as a third party observer, you did a really good job of kind of like bringing some other folks in who were, working in individual restaurant settings and hearing their stories. I know that you and I have talked off camera about potentially bringing some of that into this type of show. So like, we want to know what you folks are interested in and what's happening boots on the ground land, because I'm not in restaurants anymore. Ray is not in restaurants anymore. And so kind of, yes, we want to cover a lot of these broad brush things. And I think that our unique perspectives in our experience, our education can kind of bring that. But then I also think that, can you maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing work-wise now? Or is that something that you don't want to kind of have included on the pod?
Yeah, I work more in a food manufacturing study now. Doing more research and development.
There you go.
And so for myself, it's been very interesting. But more so, I think the cool part has been meeting people outside of restaurants, but that are still really interested in food. And so to Justin's point, I think there's a really cool dynamic here where we can have people from restaurants come on, we can have people outside of restaurants working in the food industry come on, and really kind of bridge those gaps. I've noticed a big learning gap between like the restaurant world and the outside world. And obviously there's maybe some good reason for that. Restaurants are very unique. They're very difficult, but there is a lot, I think, to be gained and learned. The goal at some point very soon is to have people coming on, sharing stories, talking about topics, kind of having a more of a free flowing conversation. I love Line Cook Thoughts. But I think it was a little restrictive in what I was able to do. And I think opening up the brand to having these more engaging conversations is, I think, going to be important for both people in and out of restaurants. So.
And that really ties into the ethos of Repertoire, which is this idea of like, it's not just one day that makes your career. It is this like tiny collection of just over time, you gather these things and put notches in your belt and you have these experiences that ultimately make it so that when it's time to go do your own thing, or when it's time to become a sous chef, or when, to Ray's point, you get that first ask to like, hey, I need you to R&D a menu for me. it is that moment that a lot of us have experienced in the industry where it's like, oh man, I've never been asked to do that any before. And so the hope is that by listening to the show kind of over time, it can compound in its own way along your journey. And so that's why we're excited to kind of bring these. I know that most of you folks who have listened to my recollections of industry news and how I decide to cover it, it's not just reading the headline. It's not just kind of like the TLDR of the article. It can sometimes go into like, what's the meta lesson from this thing that happened to XYZ chef in this city at this particular moment in time. And so the way that we've structured this episode today, I brought a couple of stories. Ray has brought a couple of stories. Ray, I might kick it over to you to kind of lead it off, and then we're just going to kind of jam on what both of us kind of react to. We also have not shared what stories we're bringing to each other, and so it's a little bit of a
Yes.
surprise for everybody involved here. So Ray, what do you got?
Yeah, I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was less of a story and more of a, I think this is a good bridge to state of the industry wise. I actually this weekend was watching the Chef's Table Legends.
Yes.
I watched Thomas Keller's episode to start. I plan on going back to watch Jose Andres and Alice Waters and Jamie Oliver's. But I was watching Thomas Keller's, and it kind of struck me. I want to say this correctly, or like, nowadays, like, there's the very real idea or reality that, back in the day our parents could buy a house and it was cheaper, and then they could just like purchase it and they could live in it and they'd be fine, whereas now it's very, very difficult for someone in our age range to buy or purchase a house. um when Chef Keller, or Chef Thomas, was talking about like opening the French Laundry, it was like, I wanted to do a new cuisine, so I went to New York and I did Raquel, and then I wanted to open up in California, so I opened the French Laundry, and it like, I almost wonder if like those days are behind us, like, and there I had this. That'll be one of 2 points. My other point was like this idea that like this type of dining seems to like kind of be leaving, or leave the importance of it is leaving. But what are your thoughts on maybe the ease in which, and not saying his road was easy, but does it feel like in 2025, someone can just go and open a restaurant like that and do their own thing and create their own staple products? Like, I feel like that we're really losing that. And I just was wondering your thoughts, because I was sitting there like, wow, this is like, I don't like, this would probably be really difficult to do. And not saying it was super easy, but it feels really difficult to do that in 2025.
Couple of unique takes on this. One, because I worked at the French Laundry, this is not a like flex or anything. It is more just I have context of his whole kind of like ecosystem, especially on the 3-star level, because I did my externship at Per Se, and then I did some time at the French Laundry as a chef de partie. And I also found myself in Napa last month. So my wife and I went for a trip with some of our family members to Napa. It was more of a vacation, and so I could actually genuinely enjoy the valley, which I still think is such a special place. And especially on the food and wine side, take the kind of geographic significance and the economy of that place and all of that stuff aside. I think some of this stuff kind of comes and goes in waves. I think you get some of the fine dining concentrated into the metropolises, and then
Mm,
somebody decides that they're going to kind of like go off and open in this, like really weird remote location, or this thing that is nobody would have expected that person to open in this place. The other example that kind of comes to mind here is like everybody was opening in Copenhagen, and then
mm,
Magnus Nielsen did Faviken in this kind of like no name place in Sweden that you had to take this kind of like train, and you had to jump in a car and you had to go through this like snowy, area to kind of like ultimately get to Faviken. And it
yeah,
provides this additional experience. The other example is everything concentrates to kind of like Barcelona or any of the big cities in Spain. And then you have Echebari, which is in like San Sebastian. I had to take like this no name bus to automatically somehow find my way to get to that restaurant.
yeah,
And I think that creates, for the person who is seeking out these types of gastronomic experiences, it adds this layer of adventure to ultimately going out and enjoying that. As areas of the world get like tapped almost, or like they're no longer hidden gems, I kind of agree with you from the sense of the areas of the map. We aren't really creating new plots of land.
yeah,
And specifically with the places that some of these chefs decide to post up, when they decide that they're going to have a sense of place, you know, Chef Keller picked an amazing place where you have just the growing conditions to have the garden across the street. You have people who are already interested in wine, and you walk down the main drag of Yountville, and it's kind of like it wouldn't be what it is without Chef Keller having the 4 or 5 places that he has on that street. And so I kind of pause there, and I'll turn it over to you to hear your thoughts. But I kind of yes, I agree with it, but I think it also presents this funny opportunity because it kind of gets fractal into cities sometimes.
Yeah.
Everybody's opening up downtown, and then there's maybe like an arts district, 20 minutes away where the real estate is a little bit cheaper, and you can actually have an opportunity there. And I think that's just the boom and bust cycle of entrepreneurs, and that's why I talk about it the way that I talk about it. You go from cook to chef to entrepreneur, and when you're kind of making these decisions of where am I going to have my business go, you can't sometimes compete in the area that is downtown LA.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think a second point to tie this up together, kind of the topic is, he had mentioned for his location in Raquel, I think he said mentioned that was in the 80s. There's an economic downturn, and basically the decision was go more casual or stick with fine dining. And Thomas wanted to go fine dining, which if that's your passion, obviously, like do what you got to do. I wonder, with the state of our economy, how things are looking, like does that same does that same thing happen again? And do we have, and we've talked about fine dining a lot. Like obviously it's beautiful and there's a place for it, but I worry that like the gap between who can go and who can't gets more and more large due to wealth inequality and whatnot. But um, I just wonder like what the state of fine dining is like. You see a Chef Keller and you see like him as one of the greatest American chefs. What does that look like in the next 10, 15 years? With rising like living standards and or rising living costs. I just wonder like if we're going to see less and less fine dining. And so maybe that's the starting. It's a heavy question, but the starting
Yeah,
topic is
no,
like,
it is a heavy question, but I want to get into these questions on this show specifically because I think it genuinely determines how somebody's path is going to look in the industry. Like you can't I mean, you can. I don't want to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't or can or can't do, but I think it's not something where you roll out of bed and it's like, I want to do fine dining. It is this like long calculated, I talk about this repertoire building all the time because it is something where you have to go, you research any of the greats and they have this long track record of just kind of like maybe going to school, maybe going to learn under another great chef, maybe going abroad. And then you ultimately build and build and build until it's time. I was just reflecting on like Alinia's doing their 20-year anniversary this week, I think. And that is, the flow on effect, the next generation coming off of Chef Grant worked at the French Laundry, then he opens Alinea. And then he has a bunch of other people who have come through his kitchen and have opened places. And kind of similar to what you're saying, I think it is this funny, I mean, it's not funny, but it is a situation we're going to have to grapple with where fine dining I still think will exist. I just
mhm,
think it to your point, it does become an accessibility question. It starts to become a how often can we reasonably do that? Even the folks like myself, like I go out to eat at nice places, but it's not where I'm going once a month. And it might even be something where you might cut it down even further. Maybe I say I do 10 nice meals a year, and now because tasting menus are, in 2027, the average tasting menu is $600 per person, maybe I
yeah,
can only do 4 of those meals a year. It just turns into this interesting question where I do still think then that the talent is going to condense, right? Because if some of these places can't stay open or there's a supply and demand problem and there's too many people on the mid-range of fine dining, then that kind of drops out. I've talked on other shows, I think with you in the past, where I think that the segmentation, it's almost like it's going to barbell where we see, and we're not going to talk about this story, but I think like the old founder of Uber is launching cloud kitchens where everything is going to be robotic and it's going to be incredibly accessible to get food
yeah,
delivered, and that's not even close to the experience that you get at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. I'm not trying to equate the two, but that is
yeah,
going to significantly maybe drop in price and be something where you don't actually scoff at maybe even paying a membership or getting delivery ordered to your house 6 days a week all of a sudden. But then it turns into something where when you're really going to go, when you're really going to commit to an experience, it's not something where you're going to be willing to put up with maybe subpar service, or you're going to
mhm.
want longer tasting menus, or you're going to want more rare and exotic ingredients because, you're not doing this again 10 times a year. You're only doing it 4 times.
And I almost worry, or I do worry. I mean, I could just speak to my own. The risk of failure in chasing that path, I worry for the next generation of cooks is too big
Mm,
because of rising costs of living, because of lower pay or stagnant pay. Like, I worry that the next Thomas Keller doesn't pursue that because the risk of failing at doing so is much greater than it was back then. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out. But I just was starting this off. I was watching it this weekend, and in my mind for like 2 hours after, I just like kept thinking about that. Like this is even this that was pretty recent. His, the French Laundry. Like when I was in college, French Laundry, obviously, like everyone wanted to stage there, and that was in 2015. Like even now, like I wonder what the demand is or what the hype is right now to go follow that. I wonder how much the pandemic affected that and how current events affect that. But just an interesting pondering thought to start
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
So
it's really interesting, and I think to your point, it's going to maybe not look exactly like Chef Keller's path, but it
yeah,
might rhyme. And I think that's the quote where people say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I think that's what you maybe need to pay attention to if you're trying to map out your career going forward. Is not how do I find the next Yountville so that I can open my quote unquote French Laundry. It is kind of like similar to what Ray is talking about. How do I research the history and see how he was able to get XYZ things just right? Where maybe you're not paying attention to, I need to find a no name town and city and village in California. I need to start to think about like, oh, maybe what were the supply and demand dynamics of this city when Chef Keller arrived? What was his pedigree and skill set before he got there? And how can I maybe copy those things as opposed to trying to exactly step in his individual footprints with my boots as I tread forward.
or kitchen clogs.
Yeah, kitchen clogs, wooden clogs. Know those well.
You're
My
up.
uh my story that I wanted to bring to you, I don't know if you saw this, but I made a prediction. I can't even remember, man. It must have been at least 2 or 3 years ago. If we
Yep.
find the clip, I will send it to you and you can pop it in this episode. But I was starting to see Michelin do guides in more cities than the main ones that they had launched in.
Yep.
And the history is outlined in what we're going to put in the show notes here. But Michelin just announced that there is its first regional guide that has been expanded, that is like a true foray into new territory since 2005 is what they're calling it. So it is the guide's American South guide, which now includes Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and then that merges with the Atlanta guide, which already
Hmm.
existed and that we
Okay.
announced on the show a couple episodes back.
Yeah, I have it here.
And so my prediction was, as we start to get some of these cities that are just a little bit too close to each other, and we're also starting to see things like entire states, i.e., California, adopt the guide,
Yep.
it is going to get to a place where it is going to just be a little bit of a no brainer to not almost copy how James Beard does it, which I
Yep.
think makes so much sense. And for those that don't know James Beard, they do like regions of the US. And so they'll do like the Pacific Northwest is its own region, the American South is its own region. And then they take, because they have to pick winners, not like Michelin does. Michelin operates much more like a tier list, whereas James Beard picks one winner to get the award for that year. And so as we're looking at this guide, I'd just be kind of curious. Like, I'm kind of giving myself a little bit of flowers here to just give a little bit of a humble brag because it kind of was a little bit obvious. It's not the coolest prediction in the world, but at the same time, seeing it actually happen is really, really cool. And to give you some numbers behind this, the Travel South USA is the organization that ultimately decided to help to bring this up and off the ground. And
Yep.
the reason behind it is because tourism ranks throughout the region as one of the top industries behind manufacturing and agriculture and is responsible for more than $220 billion in spending by visitors, which directs 1.56 million direct jobs and more than $15 billion in state and local taxes. And so they realize the economic impact of this, and they're looking the regional collaboration of the State Tourism Board in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. And so this is a huge area of the US. I have my thoughts on why Michelin ends up being important to come to a city, but I just kind of be curious to hear your thoughts on this development.
I think this helps answer my previous question. I had not heard of this um recently. I mean, in theory, I know there's a lot of, issues with the guide in terms of pricing and whatnot, but in theory, I feel like for the last few decades, obviously Michelin has expanded out, but it's been the East Coast major cities and the West Coast major cities. You go to a place like Alabama, or you go to a place like North Carolina, where cost of living is much cheaper. Although in, obviously in metro areas, it'll be higher than the rest of the state. But is this the gateway for those next chefs? Are we about is the gateway of, and those chefs are there, but is the gateway of the highest recognition going to start in these places, and we're going to see culinary meccas in North Carolina or in South Carolina or in Tennessee, which I could see happening. So I think it's a positive. Obviously, like I think the country has a vast amounts of different cuisine. Um, I'd be interested to see how they rate compared to like a New York City or a California. But I think it's great, and I think it opens up a lot of opportunity for those who can't afford to go live in a big city like New York, or can't afford to go live in a state like California because the cost of living is high. I think that this is a good opportunity. But again, we'll see. What does that mean for pricing on menus? What does that mean for the culture in these kitchens? What does that mean for burnout and everything else that comes with Michelin? But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, and I think it offers some good exposure to areas of the country that aren't recognized as much for their culinary prowess, but obviously have amazing food just in different formats.
It's a semi-connected story, but speaking locally, there's a chef at a restaurant here who was a chef de cuisine, um, Aisha Abram, if I'm getting her name correctly. She was the head chef at Canlis, and that's one of the big fine dining places here in the city that I live in, which is Seattle. And in the article that was published on her leaving Canlis, she gave, and I won't get the quote directly, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of, I want to, Chef Aisha, you're leaving, where are you going? And she gave the answer of, I'm going to go to a place like a New York or San Francisco where I can get something like a Michelin star. There is an accolade gap where ambition is not always rewarded in some of these cities that don't have Michelin representation. And I have a couple thoughts on it. One is, I don't think it is a chicken and egg problem. I definitely think the guide has to come first, and then the ambition kind of follows. And when guides come to cities, people start to realize, oh, we can actually get a star. Or maybe we're one of the best restaurants in the cities. Maybe we want to go for, our 1 star. And you have to kind of give a little bit of credit to Michelin. I will absolutely bash Michelin when they give out stars to places that, maybe don't offer that consistent of an experience, or, they happen to just give a star to a place that doesn't, you put 2 restaurants on paper and they maybe don't necessarily compare at whatever that star level happens to be.
Yeah.
But I am not seeing what I think a lot of people might expect, which is you come to a city and immediately there's 3 stars and 2 stars given out. You look at a city like Denver, you look at a city like Vancouver, BC, and the guide launches and it's maybe some bib gourmands and maybe a couple of restaurants get a Michelin star. And then what they do is they sit back and wait. And they wait until the level of execution and all of the qualities that they look for in some of these experiences ultimately get embodied. I will read them off very quickly for those that aren't familiar. 1 is quality products. 2 is harmony of flavors. 3 is the mastery of cooking techniques. 4 is the voice and personality of the chef as reflected in the cuisine. And number 5 is consistency between each visit and throughout the menu. And then they put in parentheses, each restaurant is inspected several times a year. A quick factoid that I didn't know is that the Michelin North American headquarters is in Greenville, South Carolina, and they have 23,500 employees. And so that's just kind of an interesting, maybe that is the tire
Yeah.
headquarters of Michelin, but it is just kind of an interesting, like they have this local representation, but they look around and they say, there's no places with Michelin stars near to us. And so maybe this is the natural, development that they needed to make sure that their local community was kind of heard there. And so, yeah, I'm just very, very curious to see where the ambition goes, where the talent goes, and who ends up getting recognized throughout the
You
next
see a
couple of
city
years.
like Nashville that's already such a dominant tourist destination. I mean, you put a Michelin star restaurant there, that place is always going to be slammed. Like, what are the
Absolutely.
economics on that? Like,
And you have
they're good.
a dining base in some of these cities that are excited to go out to eat. They will support places that are going to go out, really go for it, and really try to operate, execute at a really high level. I'm just excited to
And
see
this
what
is just
happens.
anecdotally too, but like, I living in New York most of my life, living in Illinois now, like I have a lot of friends from both states that'll drive to the Carolinas during the winter, during like colder periods because or even summer because it's cheaper. It's like a cheaper vacation. You can go down there, you can get more bang for your buck. And so if you have like a fine dining like destination, like I could totally see people just going there for a Michelin star restaurant. They do it for like less. Like they'll go there. Like I have friends that'll go there for specific restaurants that aren't even fine dining. Like it's just
Right.
like
Right.
people will travel for the craziest. Not I would say crazy. Not want to knock anything, but like I don't know. I think my sister like went up to a different state recently for like a gas station or something she wanted to see. I was like, all
That's
right, sounds
amazing.
good.
Yeah, that's
It
amazing.
all just depends. Like it's funny. But
Well, I
let's
think
get
the
fireworks too.
next thing to
So
look for is, like what is the East Coast? What is the Midwest? What is the American Southwest? So this is like New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. What is the Pacific Northwest? And then do we have these kind of like run by the state almost? So I'm thinking California and New York specifically, where they kind of, again, take a little bit of a playbook out of James Beard to ultimately make it so that at least the US, I know that they talk about this being part of the North American Michelin Guide, but is there something where we kind of have more of a regional thing? And again, to the point that we talked about earlier with Chef Keller, you don't have to, make that call of like, do I need to go to the place where I'm going to get the recognition from something like Michelin in order for my restaurant on the fine dining end to be successful? I can have my pick of the litter, and regardless of where I go, I can actually now have a little bit more choice. What do
yeah,
you got?
I
What do
agree.
you got next?
I thought this was interesting. So we're gonna go over tariffs real quick. So when the Trump tariffs were first put into place, I think it was beginning of April, maybe end of March. National Restaurant Association came out with a statement. I want to read some of it. Actually, maybe I can read most of it. It predetermined, or it. The reason I bring it up is you've talked for a while about the imbalance of running a restaurant. And I just wanted to like make people aware. Like obviously this tariff plan is going to increase costs in some sectors and or in many sectors and many different supply chains. I mean, I'm already you see it across a variety of ways. Um, but I think a lot of it could impact and will impact restaurants. But I think that this was an interesting like note and I wanted to read it and I just want to get your thoughts. So this was published on April 2nd and the statement reads as follows. Applying new tariffs to the scale will create change and disruption that restaurant operators will have to navigate to keep their restaurants open. Biggest concern for restaurant operators, from community restaurants to national brands, that tariffs will hike food and packaging costs and add uncertainty to managing availability while pushing prices up for consumers. Now, here's the part that I think you've been talking about a lot that I think has been missed. Restaurant operators know consumers are very sensitive to costs and have kept menu price increases to 30% in the last 5 years, while their food costs have gone up 40% in the last 5 years. So while costs have gone up 40%, the actual increase in prices has been less. It's not even matching, it's less. Restaurant operators rely on a stable supply of fresh ingredients year round to provide the menu items their customers want and expect. Many restaurant operators source as many domestic ingredients as they can, but it's simply not possible for U.S. farmers and ranchers to produce the volumes needed to support consumer demand. And obviously, we don't grow everything here. That's myself putting a quote in. Quote, during this time of change, we'll provide our members of all sizes with economic research to support their decision making and convene supply chain experts across the industry to share efforts for the best outcomes for restaurant consumers and the business viability of restaurants. So, obviously, a lot going on there. I think it was very interesting, though, the National Restaurant Association, came out and kind of gave the statement like, hey, like, in a industry that's razor thin, there's data showing that even though prices have gone up by 40% for costs in the last 5 years, restaurants have not even matched their price increases. Your thoughts?
I think that there's just less places to hide. So uh, it's going to come out on the P&L is just kind of the first stop point. And to, you know, I'm trying to be empathetic here. I don't like going and having this feeling of we were able to offer this to our customers for XYZ amount of time at this price. And now all of a sudden I'm looking at what my costs are, and it is this scary situation, quite honestly, where you're like, I can't continue to keep this game going. And I think that that's sometimes a stance that business owners take, where it's like, oh, this is just temporary. It's to what people told us about inflation a couple of years ago. It's transitory. It's just going to be this little thing. As long as we can get over it, it's going to come back down. People are taking a look at what's happening in their businesses, and it's just like, man, I'm making, or even if you're thinking about building out a kitchen, like you're starting to think about another location and you're looking at equipment costs or any of these sorts of things, that ends up being this huge, like, you can't hide from it anymore.
Expansion into a second location,
Exactly.
offering new menu options that are
Yep.
higher price point, like all that stuff.
Yeah, investing in new tools, it all starts to
Investing in your
compound.
employees,
Yep, 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 yep. All of this
like
starts to add up, and I think what is helpful about tariffs, if I may say that, you know what I mean? Like there's so many negatives that come with this. But I'm sure you saw the news that Amazon was testing certain things and some of the Chinese retailers were doing the same, where they would have the price and then they would have the increase that was going to need to be reflected due to the tariffs included in the kind of interface that you would do when you were shopping online. And I think that in and of itself makes
which
it
is
so
great.
that it makes it less of a sting to the consumer in a way where during times like COVID, or again speaking locally to some news just to provide a little bit of anecdotal stuff, the minimum wage increases that we're seeing is something where you might not see things at your, department store go up because of, they're making a little bit of higher margin and they can maybe eat, quote unquote, some of those cost increases when minimum wage goes up. But restaurants, it's like to your point, when things are a little bit more razor thin, they don't exactly have as many, levers to pull to make sure that the numbers end up working out. And so hopefully when consumers are starting to see everything go up in price, it actually gives a little bit of a permission slip to that business owner to say, this is the time. You've been putting it off for XYZ amount of time while everybody's in the state of mind of, oh, well, everything's going up. And that's the conversation that are happening at the
Just do
bars
it.
and with coworkers and in
Just
group
do it.
text
Yeah.
messages. It's just like now is the chance to raise the prices. And again, make sure that you have a little bit of that flexibility. Understanding some of the stuff that you've covered before on understanding how to cost things is incredibly important in times like this, to make sure that you don't go a whole month of not understanding that your costs have increased. And then you'll finally get to the end and realize that, man, there goes our profit. We didn't make anything this month. All this work was effectively just for break even. And then the other thing that I start to think about is starting to think about business models where you use the word decision in the quotes that you were reading and some of the context that you were adding. And I think that might also serve people well during this time. You might have a menu that is a little bit too long and you might need to pare things down. You might
Mm.
have something that is operating in a way that is maybe a little bit inefficient. And some of this, it can be a forcing function to make people really take a look at the business and really start to sharpen up some of those skills and make it so that you can weather this. Or if you're the type of person who has been thinking, okay, maybe it's time for me to open my thing now and I want it to be multiple things all at the same time, this might provide some focus. And you might say, let's try to be profitable, at least at this thing that we know that we can do well in the experience that we're providing. And so again, it feels, again, it rhymes with COVID, maybe is kind of what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
where it is this kind of like external macro force that is being imposed on the industry, and how the industry decides to kind of like make its way through it, I think is going to be really interesting, because during COVID, we kind of saw this K-shaped, discrepancy. Some businesses crushed it coming through COVID because they were
Yeah.
able to figure out delivery and they were able to figure out how to package stuff and they decided to do some additional revenue streams. And with the tariff situation, I think we might also see the same thing. The people who are
Mm.
willing to think on their feet and adapt are going to really succeed in a world where everybody else is just kind of like, they might sit on their hands, they might, make some decisions that aren't so sound for business. And so again, it is the situation like I don't have a crystal ball, nobody does, but I do think it is one of those situations where, depending on how adaptable you're willing to be, it's going to dictate the outcome for your business.
Yeah. I think what. Yeah. That's actually a pretty smart take on the idea. Like now is probably the sentiment that everything's going to go up, so the sting is less. I worry about independent restaurants, of course. I feel like a chain can kind of tweak their menu, but like if someone sees your prices too bad and they don't come back, like that is a big, that's a bigger market share that you have to deal with losing.
Which is happening. I will say, like, I see people post on X of, this is what the price of, this was all the prices of McDonald's menu items in 2018. And then 7 years later, this is what they are now. And you're seeing things like this menu item used to be $1.29 and now it's $3.69 for this menu item. And so it's like a 3x in price. I think that that's at a much larger scale. They have tons of consultants that probably come in and do the work to try to make sure that they're sourcing things in whatever way it needs to be done. But we're hopefully seeing, with AI and some people getting jobs that are a little bit more higher paying, the guest is maybe making a little bit more money, as you're starting to see certain people get roles and responsibilities. And some of these tech companies have huge valuations. I'm not saying tech companies are the only ones that eat at restaurants, but I think it is
Yep.
one of those funny things where people still need to eat 3 times a day. And so how are they going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to follow up, the National Restaurant Association put out a report on April 10th on menu prices. And this I found interesting is that um, year over year, full service menu prices have climbed 4.1%, and for like the last like for March, menu prices rose 0.4%. So that's like this, and that was a second consecutive monthly gain. So I think for me, really want to see April's data and track that. Or how are restaurants managing this? Are we raising prices? Because while prices are going up, obviously consumer confidence is going down, and they share that here. And what are sales looking like? Their reports so far haven't shown much. Obviously, the tariffs really started to kick in May. You know, there were some in April, but some in May as well. And yeah, I am worried. I think they're going to be very damaging to independents. I think they're going to be very damaging to a lot of like people's livelihoods in the restaurant industry, and I do worry about their impact. I don't think they've been really executed on like well, and I think the NRA, the National Restaurant Association, and many others agree with that. I know Jose Andres has been putting out a lot of good
Yep.
work. So,
Yep.
um, we'll see. But it's something I just wanted to track in your thoughts. But
Yeah.
just the idea that like, and you know, you look at it two ways. You look at it as like the flaws of the business model, but you also look at it of like we're in the hospitality industry, and you have owners trying everything they can to still serve their customer base and not raise prices too much. And I almost like wonder what's the big marketing campaign, what's the big messaging to consumers that faces consumers and say, look, you have been underpaying for food for way too long at restaurants. And obviously everyone's stretched thin right now and everyone's having those issues, but at the same time, like these businesses may become they may not be viable in certain ways or in certain regions due to these things. So I am very worried about that, and appreciate your thoughts on it and kind of like the upside look that you could take as well. So
Well, I mean, maybe this is a different angle. I'd be curious to hear if this lands with anybody who's listening. But it's almost like we saw a couple of there's some folks that I've interviewed on the show. I think you've had them on too, who have done pieces that really deep dive a sandwich at a small independent location. And they go through line item by line item, dictating exactly how much that thing cost, what the labor was on it when you're calculating waste, all into account. This is the price that we're selling for, which is a reasonable price for a sandwich. And look, we're actually losing money, quote unquote, on this menu item. And if that struck a chord with consumers in the market strongly, don't you think that it would turn into a situation where everybody would throw up their hands and say, oh, please change the price. Please raise this for me. You put out all the data. You clearly aren't scamming me on this sandwich. Like, I want you to be able to stay open and you know, but I
yeah,
don't know if you found this, but like, it didn't do anything. Like, yes,
yeah,
to the person who already thought that food was underpriced and all of these sorts of things. And I come back to that and I say, well, maybe more education about what the costs are doesn't actually do much to the consumer. And the
hmm
angle that I wanted to take and that I wanted to get your thoughts on is maybe what it actually needs to be is people need to charge what they need to charge. And what actually needs to happen is you need to bring the value up to the price that you're charging. And
yeah,
this comes back to something I've been frustrated about with a couple of the dining experiences I've had lately is service is just lackluster or the execution is just incredibly inconsistent. And if you're going to go out with all these higher prices, the last thing a consumer wants to feel is that like it wasn't worth it. And so
yeah,
maybe it's not a being a spreadsheet junkie or going out and getting a contract with one of your vendors to get preferential pricing. It's actually this thing that, yes, it costs money because you need to train people and maybe you need to institute some new steps of service or whatever. But you use the word hospitality as you were bringing some of those points up. And it's like, maybe that's what we need to see more of, not like we raise the prices and we increase the hospitality. Does that get us to a place where people are actually happy when they go out to eat because it is actually different from getting DoorDash delivered to my house? And yeah, I'm happy to pay $25 for this thing because it is such a good experience. I've been harping on this word on so many podcasts that have been going on, is like experience is everything. Like, can we improve the experience? And then maybe that might not completely mitigate the problem. You're still going to have that sting, especially from your regulars. So the people who have been coming to your place for years and all of a sudden your $11 thing went up to $18. But now you can confidently say as the owner, I'm charging what I need to charge. I'm making my margin on this. And I'm making sure that everybody in the organization now knows that we need to back up this price. We need to make sure that we're delivering on this thing that we're charging for, as opposed to, you know, what I've certainly experienced lately, which is this just kind of like mailing it in, you know, here you go, take it, you know, and see ya.
yeah, yeah. I think both parts of that equation are probably and I think the experience thing is going to be big. And I'm going to kick my other story to you, and then I'll let
Please.
you
Yeah,
round
yeah,
out the
yeah.
episode.
Well,
But
because I
real
only have
quick,
one more left. So you.
same.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
but I think
Okay.
it
Well,
ties into this. But real quick, anyone, I'll leave the link in this. Restaurant.org, Restaurant Performance Index remains steady in March. So I look at this report every month. April, we're going to find out how we're doing. Steadiness in March, and just to give a little bit more bright, during COVID, this was at if 100 is the baseline, over 100 is expansion, under 100 is contraction. We were up in start 2025 around 10, 101. We're kind of sharply down to 99. To give you perspective, during COVID, we were down to 90, almost 94 when the pandemic started. So we're not anywhere near that yet, but it does feel kind of
yeah,
similar.
yeah.
Talking about, I put a video up on TikTok, on our TikTok channel, kind of playing around. Dwayne Brown, one of my mentors from college, sent this to me. This idea that as economic conditions get worse, consumers will spend more on frozen pizzas, and specifically like artisanal frozen pizzas. The idea being to lower like less people going to restaurants because of cost. Can't really afford to go out to eat. Still want a good experience at home. They get this experience in frozen pizzas. In my mind, I'm like, obviously you look at like, is the next business, I mean, obviously there's a lot of business with like focus with food at home. So like, that's obviously not a new idea, but are the next generation of people hybrid going into this role of like making CPG products that are like restaurant worthy or restaurant like quality? Like I see a big opportunity for that type of like CPG product development type work. What are your thoughts on this idea of consumers looking for these same quality meals, but in the comfort of their home?
It's a little bit of a no-brainer from the sense of I don't think people want to feel like they're not doing well or that they can't afford to go out to eat. Like going to Top Ramen is maybe a little bit too far of a swing to the other end
Mm.
of the spectrum.
Well, what's interesting, and I'll add this, as I added this in the TikTok, is that while those sales go up, snacking, like Food Dive put out on April 30th, snacking has taken a hit. There's some people commenting saying on TikTok that, oh, snacking always goes down. No, like PepsiCo, Mondelez, and Campbell's are all reporting that their snacking spend from consumers is going down. So any meal
Fascinating.
they're really focusing on is like high quality at home food.
So interesting. And I wonder how much of that is maybe potentially health related. I think you and I have talked offline about the
Hmm.
trend of seeing people drink a lot less, and I know that
Yep.
that also affects restaurant margins.
GLP-1,
Yeah, like
that
you're
that is
thinking
having
about,
an effect.
yeah, like how much am I, if I have two beers at dinner, that's going to make my sleep score go down on this health tracking thing that I'm using all of a sudden. Or maybe I'm deciding that I'm going to try to lose weight, or I'm on this new fitness thing. I'm in a run club now. Those are super popular. And, my run isn't as good on Saturday when I have too much to eat, on Friday night. And so, my wife and I would much rather stay home and have a pizza together. There's a
Yeah.
couple of places here in Seattle that are doing that. Tutabella is one that where it is such a crazy execution because they build the pizza as if it is going in their Neapolitan oven, and they almost like they take it out like a third of the way or two-thirds of the way through the baking process, and then they just
Yeah.
like almost cryovac it, and then you can take it out and kind of like finish it the rest of the way. Do you know what I mean? At home,
Yeah.
that's interesting. The second one is like the tools for cooking at home are a lot more accessible. Thinking about like air fryers when you can do French fries at home, or you can do crispy Brussels sprouts in your air fryer now. All of a sudden, where
Yeah.
you are maybe thinking about I don't want to do that as an appetizer at the restaurant anymore because I'll make that at home. Or there's a new company that again will not sponsored. I just have been. I got an ad served to me from Alton Brown, who has this company called Current. It's an electric pizza oven that gets up to like 850 degrees. And so, given that as the thing, like I have two friends here in Seattle where like I go to their house and we do pizza at home because it is like you can buy the dough and buy the topping, and
Kid
and
you
just
not, I
we
have
all
one in
have
my
kids.
basement right now. I
Yeah,
literally
we
have
all
one in
have
my
kids.
basement right now. My parents
Yeah,
got me one because we just moved into a new house, and
yeah.
say our oven, we're renting out of a house, and the oven in the house has an air fryer, and it's like I kind of like poo-pooed air fryers for a while. Not like, but I'm just like, "Oh, whatever. I'm just gonna bake it in the oven." No, I get it. I get
Yep.
it.
It's
So
incredible. And so the thing that came to mind as you were talking about that is, again, this is my business brain kicking into action. What could be the plus, the grocery store plus business model that you could do delivery only. So I'm thinking pizza, let's take it as an example. Is there a world where you would get the frozen pizza that is a little bit artisanal, maybe it's a little bit more expensive than your, whatever, Totino's pizza that you're going to buy, but you can spend $40 and you can get salad and maybe something like a pre-batch cocktail or a bottle of wine and maybe like a slice of tiramisu for
Yep.
$40. And now all of a sudden that's a meal at home that you had for, $55, right? So you have like a little bit more than $10 for the pizza. And then all of a sudden it's, like you have this total meal package at home that you can enjoy. And then that person who's just all that restaurant, quote unquote, or cloud kitchen, ghost kitchen has to do is make the pre-batch salad, have the tiramisu ready to go, and then they can make a little bit of margin on alcohol. And then that ends up being something where you're meeting consumers where they're at. I don't know. That was just an interesting, because you could think about a bunch of other cuisines where people aren't going to go out to restaurants to experience this. How can you also potentially, and like a pizza shop could do this, you know what I mean? You could offer this like bundled thing of, hey, you don't want to, because like, a good pizza at one of the places that like my wife and I like to order from, like a pizza is like $27 for like a
Yeah.
big pizza, And
Well,
so
it's even worse. Like we ordered pizza yesterday. It was me, and my girlfriend, and her daughter, and it was a small pizza for me and her, and then my girlfriend is gluten free. She has celiac,
sure.
so a little gluten free pizza for her. Full
Yeah.
bottle of Sprite, 6 wings, and a slice of cake later. It's $80,
Wow. Yep.
and then a tip for the driver because they came
Yep.
out.
Yep.
But
Yep. Yeah, of
a good
course.
tip because they
Yeah.
came. I'm a little far from my pizzeria,
Sure. 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 Yeah,
but you
that's
look at
great.
something like like Rao's
Mm-hmm.
pasta
Yep.
sauce.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Remember, like a few years ago, or a few months ago, they came out with this like limited reserve sauce, and my chef brain kicked in. I was like, "Hey, what are we talking about? It's a jarred sauce." But then my consumer brain kicked in, so they have this like Rayo's homemade white truffle limited reserve sauce for like $12 a jar, or 14 depending on your region. It's a perfect example. Someone doesn't want to go out; they want to spend a little less. Okay, they buy this reserve sauce. They have pasta in the cupboard. It's all based on this. It elevates their at-home dining experience to a new level. It's like, yeah, I mean, you look at and this is that gap, right? That's what we're talking about. We
Yes.
go back to restaurants. What can they offer for consumers that want to do this? Like,
Yes, that is absolutely
it's
the takeaway, because the way
yeah,
to look at it is that's what you're competing with now, right? Like at a restaurant, yes, you have all the tables and you have the infrastructure with the professional kitchen and you have a service staff and all of the plates and whatever. But again, the experience has to have some legs. It has to have a little bit more of a punch to it. And you got to
hmm
take care of people when they come to see you, because they're giving you this like super valuable resource, which is their time. And now we live in an age when they have additional options.
It doesn't have to be like a crazy fine. Like, there's a Peruvian spot near me, a sandwich spot called Sanguche, and it's just like you go in there and it's Peruvian flags and music and really great food for a really great price. And it's just delicious. And they hit every time. They're consistent and they're pretty busy. And they always have like I brought my whole chef team there once, and they were all like blown away. Like it's just really good, authentic Peruvian sandwiches. And like that's the quality and the consistency meeting the value, and even over exceeding the value. So it's just like stuff like that is like it can be done, and it doesn't have to be in a stuffy dining room. What is your? I know we're coming up on time soon. What is your
Yeah.
last story?
Yeah. So I discovered a company called Dorsia, Dorsia. Have you heard of these guys? So Dorsia is claiming to be a members only club. You can download the app on the App Store, but you have to apply and get accepted to become a member. And they raised quite a bit of money. So I'll back up and talk about maybe a little bit of the history, because I was trying to figure out like how did Dorsia come to be. So when you look in the App Store under who launched the Dorsia app, it's under a company called Elomi,
Yeah,
Elomi. And you look at Elomi, and they used to have a company called Elomi Inc., which kind of had a very similar tagline to Dorsia. I am not going to claim on this podcast that they are connected, but it is a little bit too close to make me not think that there's a little bit of connection here. And they had
yeah.
an app called I Know the Chef app. And so they started with these beginnings of, like access, a little bit of a relationship, and a little bit of like, I want to get the difficult table and have a little bit of a recognition for me as a guest. Fast forward to now, they've fundraised $50.4 million. And their goal in this article is to, quote, revolutionize the global hospitality industry. And so they have two membership tiers. The entry-level membership is $175 per year, and Dorsia Premium Plus is a $25,000 per year membership, offering VIP client dining, premium wine selections, and exclusive entertainment. And so when you go to this app and you look at the kind of walkthrough screens, you have restaurants like Tariffs and Carbone and Cote, and then you have the ability to go in, look at the menu. Feels very much so like Google Maps or Foursquare back in the day for those that remember, or even Yelp now, where you can see exactly what the menu is, you see the prices, and then you, as a user of the app, I would assume, depending on your membership, have the ability to kind of go in and get some of these tables. And this is almost like an operationalized version of the story that I think I covered a while back when we saw these people. I think it was a New Yorker piece where people were sniping reservations from a place like Carbone or Tariffs and then selling them for something like $500 on a secondary market because they created bots to kind of snipe some of these reservations. And so you see that, New York, the Hamptons, LA, Miami, London, Dubai, Aspen, they're clearly going for some of these kind of like tier 1 cities for getting some of these reservations, which makes sense because, as we talked about earlier in the show, that's where these types of experiences typically tend to condense. What I thought was interesting is the fact that the app has a 2.6 star rating out of 5 on the App Store right now.
Yeah.
A lot of these from, there was some in 2023. There's one rating from 2025, and it says, I'm a paying member, and every time I go to book something, I'm met with a black screen. I don't understand how they can't get this right. It's not a complicated app. The tech needs work instead of spending 7 figures on a party. And so it is one of these funny situations where this was brought to my attention because I was talking to the person I was speaking with about, I have a New York trip coming up, and they're like, oh, well, I heard about this, this app that can get you some of these reservations in some of these hard places. And I'm not like the most special person in the world, but it is one of those funny situations where it's like, do you want to, I guess maybe I'll back up. I get upset when I sometimes realize that restaurants sometimes don't end up getting a benefit from their restaurant being in high demand.
Yep.
And then you have some of these third parties come in that, arguably make it harder for some of these tables to ultimately be gained. And the line that I read, which is in a resident.com announcement of their fundraise, is a line that I thought you would just really get a kick out of because it is just, in my opinion, incredibly hypocritical. The CEO said, quote, "The hospitality industry is broken, riddled with inefficiencies, underground economies, and outdated systems that make access to the best experiences frustrating and unpredictable. Just like Uber revolutionized mobility, Dorsia is doing the same thing for dining and social life." And I don't think you can have both, right? Like, this guy is saying that he is taking away the underground economy of restaurants while at the same time making his own pseudo underground economy of, you have to pay this membership and then you can get access to this thing. I just think it is a little bit silly that is where we've gotten to in order to get some of these experiences. And I think that a company like this, if they end up doing well, is almost a counterpoint to what we talked about earlier in the show, where fine dining is like a little bit dwindling. It is like they actually can't keep up with demand. There's not enough, tables. And so that just turned into a really interesting like rabbit hole that I went down. Curious your thoughts.
I don't know if it's so much as dwindling, except that, or more so just the gap between those who can afford it and those can't grow. I personally am not a fan of this idea.
Yeah.
It's just it reeks of elitism, and it reeks of the idea that like I'm gonna pay $175, I think you mentioned, for an app that doesn't work clearly. The idea of like democratizing reservations in a platform that's basically like scalping reservations, much like if you were trying to go to a concert and you have bots doing it, in order to sell those back to people. Like, no, you're creating a fake economy to bolster your own business, and people will pay it. I mean, we talked offline about the
Fly Fish Club.
Fly
Yeah.
Fish Club by Gary Vee's group, and the many different issues they had with the SEC, and you know all the stuff that comes with that, and just like how the menu is just a basic menu, and I'm sure the food is produced well and produced good, but it's like nothing that'll blow your mind. And like I look at this and it's just like it is angering. It just keeps it further divides the wealth gap and the class gap between who can eat at what restaurant. And I think it really continues to push elitism into the food industry. And this is my worry. It's like what is the take for going to fine dining for many people when you have to pay just to even get a spot in the restaurant, let alone get to the restaurant itself. And then I just wonder, like, I wonder, like, some of the restaurants that are on here, like Una, Pizza
Yeah, yeah.
Napolitana, or Noodle Bar. I don't know, like, are those restaurants where you're paying 100, like, they're good restaurants, I've been to Noodle Bar, but, like, I wouldn't pay $175 subscription just to be able to get a reservation at it. A pasta bar, like, I've been there. Uh, like, so yeah, it I don't know. This is one where I would definitely not pay, but there's people that are gonna pay it, and then, like I said, it just furthers this gap of, like, and then who is it for at the end of the day? Who is it for? Like, it's for people that can afford it, obviously, but, like, what about the young chef that's trying to, like, save up to go to one of these places, and now you have another hurdle to get through just to go dine at one of these places? It's just it's disheartening to see.
Well, I back up for a second and I ask myself, like, why are some of these tables so hard? Is it because it is actually just packed every night? Or is it a situation, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you try to go to book somewhere and they're using one of the outdated reservation platforms where, before tools like Talk came in where you had to pay a deposit, you can go to, I remember Open Table back in the day. You could just go and book a reservation and there was no repercussions. And so you would have people who would like book 4 reservations on one night, text the group chat and say, hey, I have tables at all these places. Which one do you guys want to go to? The group chat decides, and then you just leave all of those reservations outstanding. And so restaurants were getting screwed because, the 8 top that we had booked at 7:30 doesn't show up. And now it is this just whole disaster of how do we figure this out? And so then you saw it whiplash to the other side where, Talk was making you prepay sometimes the full amount before you came to the meal, which is really, really helpful. And then you have some of these other, like, I'm not bashing Dorsia because clearly they've brought a couple. I won't bash them all the way, maybe I'll say, because
Yeah.
it seems like they have done a couple of things, but like they're not enough to, again, warrant what it seems like they're charging. So one benefit that they share is a patented payment technology that eliminates the wait for the bill, allowing users to seamlessly exit venues without hassle. And I will share a criticism, which is I hear Ben Leventhal of Blackbird go on certain podcasts and he says, isn't it so great that I can just like take my phone and they know who I am and so I can just leave? And I think about hospitality experiences and like, what if there was something that the person didn't enjoy? Where's the relationship that's getting built with front of house? Where is any of the, like last minute things that I could potentially connect with you on as a guest if you're just going to
Yeah.
get up and leave? And so it is like their solutions, quote unquote, that don't actually, they end up creating more problems or end up actually making problems worse rather
Yeah.
than actually either getting to the root of the problem, which is maybe we can't allow people to double book stuff. I think that was one thing that I think Resi did, where if you had a reservation on your account booked at one place at one specific time, that was it. You couldn't book another reservation at another restaurant at that time because your account was already booked and said to be at a specific place for a meal. And so that was a really interesting way of limiting it. Another one that I'll give a shout out is that does a membership is my friends Anders and Caitlin. They have a community where they take a membership, but then they will organize things like an 8-person private dining room experience at a 2 Michelin star restaurant for members.
Yeah.
That's something that's worth, potentially you get access, you get the ability to, I know I'm going to get a spot at this restaurant that I've been hyped to go to. It's not taking reservations away from the 2 tops and the 4 tops. And then when you go, like, what's going to happen? You're going to get the chef to come out and explain a little bit. You're maybe going to get a bit of additional wine. And then the membership can pay for some of that stuff, as opposed to what you're saying, where, you pay this $175 just to get access for one of these things. And then what in the world happens when you go to the app, you book the thing, and then you look on Google Maps and,
It's not
there's a bunch
working.
of availability. I didn't need
You're screwed.
I didn't need Dorsia to book this reservation,
Yeah.
right?
But
Like
they
I could have
took
gotten
all
this
the
without you. Now
and
I'm
they
going to
or they
cancel
took
my membership
or
and
they took
whatever.
all the real estate and then that it's gone. It's like,
Totally.
and like real quick, okay, like, and like to your point, what you had mentioned for those, like those are great, and I think like I support charging people that don't show up. All that stuff is great. So I'm just talking about Dorsia, but it's like their premium membership, $5,000 a year with $5,000 in US dollar value and fun coupons in addition to other benefits and perks. Which, okay, what are those? Premium Plus membership, $25,000 a year with $25,000 US dollar value and fun coupons. Who is this for? It's
Right,
just for
right.
it
And
just
we
again,
well,
it's insane.
we should say like Dorsia is also hosting additional events. So they did
Yeah.
a thing at Miami. I think it was at Art Basel. They did a thing, and that's what it should quote unquote before. It should not be, going towards restaurants and saying like, oh, we're going to make sure that we can get you a table at Tariffs. Because here's I guess maybe the kicker for me is if you're going to pay for one of these, memberships and tables, unless it's absolutely 100% guaranteed that I'm going to have a table, that also creates this really funny, interesting dynamic where all of a sudden now you're looking and you're saying, look at how much I'm paying and you can't get me access. That just turns into this whole, again, problem. And to your point, it makes it a little bit harder for the average consumer to be able to go out and support some of these places. So that was just a story that I read. Again, I'm going to keep an eye on them. They raised this $50 million at $146 million valuation. And so we're going to kind of see, there seems to be a lot of people from Meta and Uber and hospitality organizations that were involved. And so, the hope is that they can actually do something that's positive for the industry. But at this point in time, I don't think they would get a vote of confidence from myself or Ray.
I'm open to being proven wrong, and I'm not, if it ends up being a resource, revenue generator for the restaurant itself, then like there is a positive in that. So I'm open to that for Dorsia. At the same time, you have a $25,000 membership. So I don't know. We'll see.
What else you got? You got one more?
One that's quick because I'm gonna have to hop
Sure,
soon.
sure.
I just want to shout out the Line Cook Reddit page.
Okay.
There's some ghastly stuff on there sometimes.
Yes.
But there's also some pretty interesting stuff that I think is fun to read about and kind of see what people are saying. Like, I would just like implore people to go on and check out the Line Cook Reddit. Like Chick-fil-A interview advice. So interviews tonight with Chick-fil-A, pretty really good at interviews, but I know Chick-fil-A is a different ballgame. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Reddit Line Cook community is pretty strong. I use them a lot. Let's say a lot. I use them a good amount with my restaurant writing to kind of get a general sense of what people like about a certain product or what their thoughts are on certain ideas. So maybe not a topic, but just a point in the right direction. Line Cooks on Reddit is a great thread. If you have something that, Justin, if you want to share something you found useful recently, maybe that's a good way to end the show.
Yeah, well, what I'll say is we are going to be doing the show in a lot more of a consistent cadence. I think that we want to stay on top of industry news a little bit more. I know that between family stuff and job things, Ray and I have both taken a little bit of a hiatus from content. And so I think this format will allow both of us to be in your feeds and your ears and your video players a lot more, which I'm pretty pumped for. But then at the same time, I think like a lot of these issues is what motivates the educational products we're making. I'm going to be hosting some workshops soon. And so definitely check those links out in the show notes. Make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter to get insights there. And I think just if there's things you folks want to hear, I know that we talked at the top of the show about having folks potentially come on. I know that can be a big ask for a lot of folks. Even submitting stories, like sharing the news articles you want to see in the DMs with us or replying to newsletters and saying, hey, I'd love for you guys to talk about this, I think would be a really, really cool way to engage with you folks and make sure that we're talking about the issues that you care about. And so, yeah, like as much as this is Ray and I having a dialogue, like I think that we're a little bit too easy to get a hold of. And so if there's anything that anybody wants, to see on these shows, we're obviously going to drive, but, always open to hearing from you folks. And I think that is one of the coolest parts about Reddit is that anybody can post. And I think that's one of the reasons why people go there for, just a very unfiltered conversation. Sometimes I agree with you. It can be a bit of a cesspool, but yeah, when you really want the truth on something, or you really want like an unfiltered perspective on something, Reddit's a great resource.
Definitely. TikTok, we're Repertoire on TikTok. If you're interested in this type of news industry content, looking to post more frequently there, obviously we'll do this on a consistent basis, but that just a little bit more agility in that front. So
yeah, great shout out. Well, great to see you, Ray. Thanks for all you do and for coming on. I'm just excited to hear what folks think in the comments, and if there's anything else that you folks want to see, please let us know.
And if you've used Dorsia and you have a $25,000 membership, please let us know.
Yeah.
Thanks.